We will now be hearing from a DSPI law-qualified interpreter specializing in the legal field who teaches Level 3 in community interpreting and DipTrans courses for Portuguese speakers and has been an interpreter for over 20 years. She will guide you through developing your note-taking systems, emphasizing key points to remember and the importance of structuring notes for clarity. On behalf of Linguist Collective, she aims to equip interpreters with the skills to enhance their efficiency, precision, and confidence in professional settings. Please welcome Helena El Masri. And thank you so much for joining us and for stepping in last minute.
That's okay. Thank you for inviting me. Before I introduce myself, I was going to say that I was asked because a colleague was in dire straits and couldn't make to run the presentation, and I thought it was the only ethical thing to do was really to thank her for sharing the work she had done, the presentation. So I don't want to take the credit for it. So about myself, my name is Helena El Masri. I'm going to share my presentation before I forget. I've been a trainer for over 20 years now, training interpreters and translators in the UK. This presentation really aims to give you an idea of what, when, and how to take notes, and it is also an invitation for you to try it for yourself. So what is note-taking? I'm sure everyone is familiar with the concept of note-taking, especially those who are interpreters. And from my observations of teaching this skill to mainly level 3 community interpreters, note-taking is like Marmite in the UK. You either love it or hate it. And I think that most interpreters like myself feel a bit, but they feel a bit overwhelmed at first, not knowing how to take notes, what to choose to take a note of. But eventually, with practice, they do find their groove, and their note-taking takes some form or shape. You can take notes using small pictures or symbols, or using abbreviations. If you have more of a visual mind, then you perhaps will opt for the symbols. But not everyone uses symbols, so don't feel that you have to learn them to be able to actually take notes of anything. I myself use abbreviations in my notes, so I rarely ever use symbols. So it's very personal, as I'm going to show you here. So the interpreters use notes in many different settings, and the aim is really to use these notes to help us remember information. So it's as an aid memory, not instead of our memory. Ideally, we should, to have effective interpreting, we should really develop our active listening, understanding of the message, and really retain the message so that we concentrate on all the nuances of the message. However, when this information is quite lengthy or complex, then it's a good idea to complement these with notes to ensure we remember everything accurately. And as we learn to take notes, one important aspect is to have a structure to these notes to ensure that when they are effective when we're actually looking at them and recreating the message. Meaning that either using symbols or abbreviations, these must be simple. They cannot be complex. Otherwise, sometimes when you look at the notes, you just cannot remember what they mean. So you need to find ways of using notes that actually you associate immediately with the words. So try not to write everything down, or you will lose track of what you are actually hearing. So the idea is to be really concise in your notes. For example, using arrows and underlining things for emphasis, and kind of use the whole page to take for the story to take a form of some kind, so that you can read from your notes and you follow through. Another reason you must think about these notes individually is because, to me, diff could mean different, but to you could mean difficult. So again, always create these system for yourself according to what you understand from the words and from the notes. What do we take notes of? So you can do obviously a whole concept or a whole ideas, but I think in interpreting, what we really should focus on taking notes of is key words, key information, dates, telephone numbers, car registration plates, serial numbers. It's really difficult to memorize all those numbers in a sentence. So here, for example, in the slide, you have these emoticons that represent probably symbols, but you can use all these terms, or you can take notes of all these terms by using abbreviations. So if you use a capital P for person, POL for police, a capital C for court, as opposed to a lowercase c for cat, for example. So you start to have a methodology that you know it's your creative notes. It's not something you can always learn in a book. And we will not have time to do a practical exercise because we're running out of time, but I would like to invite you to, when you have a moment and you want to try out your own note taking, to do a table of 10 terms. You can even start with these. All these terms are easily abbreviated. So start thinking, how would you wish to make a note of fight or statement or accident or disease. You can also put death. It doesn't have to always be disease. So you have to think about how would you translate that back into a sentence by using those symbols and abbreviations. It's better to think about it by yourself and to try it out by yourself rather than just copying from a book or from what you see on a YouTube video, because they could be too complex. And as a starter of taking, as an interpreter in the beginning, taking notes, you need to start slowly. So when do you use note taking? Obviously, when the speech is quite long, when utterances are lengthy, for sure, you have to find a way to remember it. This is quite common in telephone interpreting, for example. And I remember myself when I started as an interpreter long time ago, and I used to do telephone interpreting. There was a time when a lot of Angolan refugees arrived and they were dispersed to Liverpool. And the calls were maybe 2-3 times a week to give instructions to each individual to go and what they had to do. There was a lot of information that they were giving me because they only had one phone. Remember that time when you have to pass the phone across to the other person? Those who are interpreters for a long time perhaps remember that. So basically, this is kind of I memorized it because it's something that stayed with me for a long time, but they would say something like, please tell this lady that she needs to be ready at 8 a.m. in the morning at the door with all her belongings. This voucher she needs to give to the bus driver, and the envelope contains the address where she's going to be living and vouchers for the first 2 weeks so that she can buy food in the local shops. She must use the whole voucher as there is no change given. When she arrives in Liverpool, someone called Claire will meet her to take her to the address and show her around the shops. And later in that week, they will take her to register her and her family at the doctor and register the children in school. They will give her a handbook with local telephone numbers and addresses where she can go for help. And then ask her if she understood everything. So this would be the whole information I had to take notes of, because in the beginning I used to, now I remember it. But things like Liverpool, it could have been another city, 8 a.m., it could be 10 a.m. or 9 a.m. It would change, not always Claire, somebody else, John. But I needed to keep track of those names and dates and times because that was important to not forget and be correct in my instructions to the person. So you will have other settings, perhaps legal, medical, and maybe you cannot stop the speakers often. So you need to take quite a lot of notes. For example, in court, you would probably resort to do simultaneous interpreting. But what if you were doing just consecutive? You would have to take quite a lot of notes as well. Oh, it went back. Sorry. So how do you really so I was going to say another thing. This is why structuring your notes comes in handy, and underlining important aspects of the message, so you can separate, for example, different sentences in columns with arrows, and you know when you look at it that you know which one comes first after such a long speech. So now it's up to you, obviously, to think of developing your own note-take system. So I wouldn't listen to others telling you how you must do this or do that. I would say you must do what you need to do that suits you. So if you have a good memory and retention, maybe you need less notes. If you struggle with taking on everything when you're listening to a person speaking, perhaps because of their accent or whatever other reason, which is quite common in the beginning of interpreting, learn to be assertive and intervene. The interpreter needs repetition, and it's at this stage when then you can actually take some notes to reinforce half of what you learned and half of what you missed, and then you will be able to be concise in your rendition of what the person said. The more you practice, the better you understand your own scribbles. And if you ask any interpreter, they don't understand the scribbles of each other because it's so personal. So if you want to practice, for example, with real speeches, use the EU speech repository, or even any YouTube video on any subject will do, but don't do more than 2 or 3 minutes in the beginning so you don't feel disheartened with your progress. Start with very little information and you will see what the exercise, you will see that that exercise will become easier as you progress. And you can even mimic. So you put the speech on, you take your notes, and then as you lose it, just say the interpreter needs repetition, put the video back in the beginning and do it again and see what you missed and what you can add to, because this is how I learned, and I think how every interpreter learns. So structure, emphasis, and obviously being able to recreate the message is what's really important for the note-taking to be effective. Oh, I think I've just said all that about developing your own note-taking system. So personalize it to your own field if you need to. You can have one for legal, one for medical, or any other setting that you work on. And like I said, that's the practice self-evaluation I was explaining. You can do it yourself, and then you can compare it with the video again. I'll leave it. I have to read what I'm not reading from the screen, so So in conclusion, I would say practice regularly, at least 3 times a week if you're just beginning interpreting. If you're doing a course, practice doing that with your class. For example, our classes in DPSI Online have a live tutor, so you can even take notes of what the tutor is saying for your own benefit for later. So remember that if you go to the EU speech repository, remember that every speech or dialogue of a person tells a story. So take every effort in the beginning to listen to it actively, and only take notes if you really cannot keep up with all the listening and remembering it. And then work on your notes. Don't let the notes get in the way of listening. So that's kind of sometimes something that beginner interpreters do, is that they concentrate too much on writing everything down and then read from the notes, which it kind of delays the flow of the conversation when we're interpreting. The idea is really to take the same amount of time as the speaker did to pass on the message. And as I always say, practice makes progress. So I think, oops, keeps going back, sorry. So I think that's what I leave you with, is to continue to practice and you will for sure progress. Thank you for listening. Any questions?
That was wonderful. Thank you so much. And I'm sure people will have a lot to go away and try out now. We do have a question. As a trainer and a practicing interpreter, do you think that AI would replace interpreters?
No, no, I think we should learn how to use AI to our benefit. Many conference interpreters already use transcribing the speeches of the speakers to help them and do some side translation, but they are advanced interpreters and they have trained. So For beginner interpreters, I don't recommend, because then you have this false sense of security that you know what you're talking about. And then what if the transcription is wrong? You are just fully believing what the screen is telling you. I think it's much better to be proactive in remembering and active listening rather than relying on AI. But for sure, use it when it's not important, when it's not so serious and complex, to help you with your confidence. That would be very good exercise. That's what I tell my students. You can use it to your advantage, but not instead of your memory and instead of your own skills.
Brilliant. And will most of the above points be applicable for translators as well?
Um, I think the notes translators do are different. I don't think we do as many note taking in translation, and I don't believe in translators' notes, because if it's not all translated into the other language, it kind of defeats the purpose. So I believe in translators' notes to be sent to the client and say, look, the translator has these questions about the translation or about um, the purpose of the translation, and feel and decide it with the client. But translators' notes to me are not really useful for anybody, because you don't want to go down to read what the translator thinks, and it will not be in the final document anyway. So I think that they are two different things to be dealt with differently.
Thank you so much for that answer and for stepping in last minute once again.
Okay, thank you.